So let's move into strings. And the strings, what we're going to look at is a couple of things. How do you conduct an object creation of string? How do you create a string object? What are the syntax, print, special keys, concatenation, working with strings, indexing, slicing, immutability of strings, and length of strings. Now, I know, once again, this is basically a torrent of information that's coming to you. You might need to watch this a few times just to let these sink in, because these are obviously new concept for you as you're looking at it for the first time. There are a lot of information to take in. And one of the things about programming is that you learn faster and more and grasp more by doing. Okay, so it's good if you can actually try along or follow along by typing your own code as well. So let's just start with the first thing that we want to do here is how do we create a string object? So you have this apostrophe. Okay, here we have strings. You can actually create it by single quote or double quote. Okay, so we're going to create a string object called last emperor by using single quote. Okay, so there you go. What you have there is actually a string object. What about double quote? It does the same thing. Okay, notice that it gets reduced to single quote. Now there is a reason why we actually do that. The next example will show you. And now occasionally, obviously in English, there is apostrophe in some of the sentences, like emperor's new clothes. If you do single quote, you're going to get an error message because you have to encapsulate the whole string in either the single quote or double quote. So in this situation, what do we do? Okay, we need to actually use double quote rather than single quote. Okay, so hence you use double quote here, as I mentioned in the comment or mentioned or highlighted in the comment. You use double quote to work around the single quote, and you won't have that problem anymore. And notice that Python quite smartly picked up that you're using double quote to create this strings, string object. Alternatively, you can use this, which is the escape key or special key here, which allows you to work around the apostrophe there. So it actually picks that up as well. Now from time to time, as one of the way to learn quickly, you want to actually interact with the Python interpreter, which is what we're doing here with this notebook, is to display all the information onto the console or the screen. And you use print to do exactly that. All right, so we're going to run this cell, and what you see here is that it print line 1 and line 2. Notice that this is quite pretty. It doesn't have that ugly single quote or double quote in that's displayed with the actual text itself. That's what print does, is that it prints out the actual onto the console the actual variable value. In this case, it happens to be a string object. So what about if we print this? And what you will get is actually this really funny outcome. You have single quote here and C semicolon slash Dropbox slash new. It's supposed to print like that. But what do we get? Instead, what we get is actually Dropbox and then you on the next line. This is because /n is a special character in Python. It means new line. So to work around this, we add a R before the actual first quote. This informs Python to use raw strings within the actual quotation itself. So let's run this, and voila, it actually will solve that problem that you faced with earlier. Other things that you can do is that you notice that we are printing multiple lines here. Okay, sometimes the output that you want to actually provide can be quite long, so you use multiple line in this case. Okay, the other alternative is that you can actually add this backslash. What happens is that when you actually print, typically it adds a blank line here. So when you actually put that backslash, it removes the blank line. Now, one thing that I omitted, and hopefully you picked that up, is this. Notice earlier when we do print, we use single quote You can also use double quote. It doesn't actually change much. But the difference here is that we use triple quote. Now the purpose of the triple quote is so that you get this multiple line outputs. Okay, right? So that's really the purpose of using multiple lines or triple quote here. All right, so the backslash, as I mentioned, prevents automatic inclusion of end of line. One of the beauty of Python is that it is a really powerful language that allows you to manipulate text very, very easily. Now, have a guess. What happens if I do this? I have a string object with a plus and then another string object. Let's try that out. What you get is actually a creation of a new string object, and you get I love Python. So the plus here is smart enough to know that it is no longer, you're not working with integer or numbers here, you're actually working with a string object. It actually picks that up. So what it does is that it concatenates this through two strings object. What happens if I do 10 multiply Python? What I get is 10. Okay, Python repeated 10 times. And that's actually also a string object on its own. What about this? If I have Python within double quote and then a space and then a double quote with red in it, what actually happens? It actually merges the two automatically. So note the comment here actually also say automatically you have a concatenation of two or more string literal, which is a fancy word for string in quotation when they are next to each other. Right, let's finish off this part before we take a break to come back to indexing a little later. I just want some of these concepts to sink in. So we have a sentence here, my dear wife listens to space, the latest K-pop. Now what do you think that will be? Alright, so let's run this and you won't see anything. Have a guess again, you have one last chance to guess. Would it actually do exactly what we just learned in the code and output number 34? Let's have a look. Voila. Okay, it automatically concatenate two or more string literals just as we expected. Okay, notice the reliability and the consistency in terms of the performance here. It repeats itself. It doesn't actually deviate from that. That's really what we want, is that the behavior doesn't change. All right, so we have prefix is equal to that. Okay, so what happens if we actually put these prefix and then Uno? Essentially what we're trying to do is actually we try to get to Arduino, right? And you probably, if you read ahead, you already can see it here, the variable cannot be concatenated to string literals. So we're operating with another different object here. Notice is variable. We looked at variable earlier, okay, and now you notice that you cannot concatenate the variable to a string literals. Okay, so that's one of the rule in the syntax of Python. But you can put a plus. All right, if you put a plus, it will automatically combine or concatenate the two string, and what you get is actually Arduino. All right, so what have we covered so far? What we've covered, let's come back up here, is how to determine data types, right? And also a couple of things about string, how to create a string object, the actual syntax, print, special key, and concatenation, and finally working with strings. When we come back, we're gonna continue on working with strings and also understand how indexing and the rest works. All right, I'll see you in the next video.